This is the Bounce Back Generation podcast.
Something in me just would not let me give up, even when I really wanted it to. And I talk about it as if it's just there's a fire in me that just won't die no matter what I go through. I've transformed it into giving and sparking that fire in other kids.
This is the Bounce Back Generation podcast. We interview real people who tell us their stories of resilience, overcoming trauma, and discuss the science behind personal growth. I'm Jennifer Dillon. If you're in the foster care system or have been in the system, this podcast is for you. Joining us is Cody Van Felden. She grew up in foster care and is here to talk about her life in care and what foster kids need to grow resilient. Today, she's a project coordinator for Palenti Collaborative Services, and she's going to tell us about the new California Hope program, which will be providing kids who age out of the system with cash to help them get their lives started. This is an amazing program and will also have funds available for kids who lost a parent during COVID. You will not want to miss this information. We are so excited to have you here, Cody. I adopted a child from foster care, so this is a really emotional and important subject for me. And I'm just so grateful that you're here to express I don't want to say that you're the voice of the foster youth, but in a way you are. And I'm really grateful that you can be here to talk about your own personal experiences. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm very, very happy to be here. And as you had mentioned, I am not the main voice of foster youth, but I've been in a lot of spaces where I've seen the lack of foster youth voices. So I've kind of stepped into that role over the last few years to make sure that foster youth are at the tables, regardless of what table that is. So I'm really happy to be here.
Well, and you're also creating a table with this new California program. So we'll talk about that a little bit later, but I would just want to start with your own personal experience. Can you talk about your personal journey, how you got into foster care, and also what does it mean to go through a quote unquote failed adoption?
Yeah. So as you had mentioned earlier, I did enter the foster care system when I was an infant, and I was in and out of a few different placements up until the age of 4. I was adopted by a lesbian couple along with 2 of my other siblings. We were adopted as a set, so that was really nice to have them there through all of those experiences. I myself lived with my adoptive family for 13 years, and it wasn't the worst home, but me and my siblings, we did experience a significant amount of emotional abuse. We were all adopted from 3 to 6, so we did remember a little bit of things, and it did create that impact. We were taken out due to neglect from our parents. They had tried to keep getting us back, but they both succumbed to drug abuse. When I did turn 16, my adoptive parents, they had kicked me out. And that was the first time I'd experienced homelessness. And CPS, they did intervene and tried to return me back to the home. But eventually that never did happen. And unfortunately, because of the incorrect handling of my case, I was never rendered as a ward of court. So typically when you have a failed adoption, you are entered back into the system and all the documents, everything is done correctly. In my case, none of that occurred. I was living in a foster home, but I was not a foster child. So all the services that a foster child would typically get never occurred. So instead, when I turned 18, my foster parents kicked me out because I did not qualify for AB 12.
AB 12 being payments.
Extended foster care, yes. And it hurt just being abandoned by my biological parents, then my adoptive family, then the foster family. It was almost seemed really just repetitive of losing all of those families. On my end, it's probably the low version of how many families a foster child can typically go through. And then in my early adult years, I experienced a wide range of traumas, all while maintaining to attend college. I started community college at 17. So my very first semester of college was when I entered homelessness. Some of my semesters, I was getting really below average grades and taking incompletes left and right. I became very good at functioning in a permanent state of survival, which allowed me to survive, but it's not a strong suit I like to have. I feel a lot of foster youth, they shouldn't be forced into a situation where they have to survive. And then eventually I actually reconnected with my biological family, which isn't a story you often hear. So it was really, really nice. And that was how I became rescued from homelessness. And once I moved in with them, I was able to finish out my community college career with straight A's. I earned highest honors. And then I was able to transfer to Sacramento State University. And that is where I currently attend. And I'm set to graduate in spring 2023. So next year, or 2024. So next year, it's coming up really soon. And then one of the main resources that did get me through all of that turmoil was my Guardian Scholars Program. I was able to have services as being a former foster youth, both at community college and university. They essentially became part of my family. And with my perspective, it allowed me to find comfort in the fact that the program and even the college itself never moves. And it came a lot out of comfort, because with families, they can move, they can walk out of your life, but with the college campus and the program, they don't leave. Even if the individual stop working there, the program is still there to support me. Shortly before I did graduate from community college, I applied to work with John Burton Advocates for Youth as a youth advocate, and I've been doing that work for the last 4 years. And at the time, I had no idea what it meant to be an advocate. The only thing that I had known at the time was that I didn't want what happened to me to happen to anyone else. I experienced a failed adoption, but the system basically covered it up, and I became a foster youth who fell through the cracks. And upon 18, I didn't receive any of the services and just kind of went off grid. But once I began working, I absolutely fell in love with advocacy work and discovered I had a hidden talent of public speaking that I never knew was there. So I learned how to be a leader and take my own story and make it my own power.
You have obviously a resilient story. You're telling this kind of journey that you've gone through. And I want to help people to pull out some of the threads of how you kind of rebuilt that foundation or built a new foundation that you can stand on. And you touched on so many things. And I want to start with that concept of survival, because a lot of people define being resilient as being a survivor. You do whatever you need to do to just get to the next day. And what we try to do is show resilience more as that process that you were talking about, that you found some touch points, like having the program be there always in the background, having your birth family connections. So there's 6 things that we've identified that are really important to build resilience. So I'm going to just tell them off, and then maybe you can find some of those that you feel like were really important to you and see if they fit. So the first is protection. Having some place where you felt safe, where you felt that people were there for you or the environment was there for you to keep you safe. Second is relationships. At least one person that would be there for you if you needed help, a case of emergency person. Third is coping skills, being taught or learning coping skills that help you to manage when you feel really, really bad. Confidence building, like obviously you're very good at public speaking, building up that confidence and having the ability to learn and fail and learn and fail until you get great at something. Belonging, having a place to belong. And finally, storytelling, which is really what you're doing now. I'm hoping that if there are any foster youth who are listening, that maybe you can talk about how some of those elements might be something that they can look for to help build their own foundations again.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely relate to a lot of those, especially safety, having just a safe place to be able to take care of yourself. And coping skills is one of the things that really got me through, especially around perspective. I remember several years ago when if I had something happen to me, it was devastating. Like I couldn't function for the whole day when something would happen. And with all of the work that I was doing with my therapists and my counselors at school, really kind of changed my perspective. Like if something is happening and there's nothing you can do at the moment, that it's okay. There's always the next day. There's always something that you can do. And just having the one person was actually my therapist. She was actually the first positive consistency I had in my life, being able to just find that one person, because all it really takes is just one person. I mean, I've had a lot of people go in and out of my life, but just having that one person there, even when I don't have a relationship with them now, they made such an impact on my life that everything that I'm doing now is for them. Having a safe place to be. I mean, I remember when I was couch hopping and just always struggling to find a place to stay, and homework is not in the forefront of my brain when I'm having to figure out where am I going to sleep, who are the people I'm going to be around. Because a lot of the people that were even willing to let me sleep on their couches were not good populations that I wanted to be around. There was a lot of drugs and alcohol, and that wasn't a place I wanted to be. It was hard when they were the only ones that were willing to let me sleep somewhere. So I was in a lot of risky situations, and it becomes a scary world. It did help me build a lot of resilience. And one thing that I always mention, even when I was a kid, there were times where I wish I didn't have resilience, but like something in me just would not let me give up, even when I really wanted it to. And I talk about it as if it's just there's a fire in me that just won't die no matter what I go through. It does take steps to build, and it's possible to build. For me, it started as a little fire, and now I've transformed it into giving and sparking that fire in other kids.
Yeah, well, it's funny because that's why we use the lightning bolt in our logos, because that's what that thing is. And part of having that, some people just have it. Part of building it can be overcoming some of those negative messages that the world seems to be sending. If you're in foster care or adopted, I mean, there is that sense that I did something, it's my fault. There's a reason why this happened to me. For me, I feel like that's a really hard thing to get through, and to learn that, no, it's not about you. You didn't do anything wrong. I talked to foster kids where it's like, actually, other people did this.
Yeah.
When you were a baby, you had nothing to do with it. But it's emotionally hard to get through. Do you have thoughts about that?
Yeah, that was one of the really big things that helped me once I started getting into advocacy work was, as you had mentioned earlier, I myself asked why all the time when I was a kid, like, why me? What did I do to deserve the treatment that I'm getting? And with the work that I'm doing with advocacy and storytelling, it gave me that reason why, and it gave me a sense of purpose. And like, I hope that for other foster youth, even now, even after everything that I've been through and all the work that I've accomplished, I still sometimes ask that question. I mean, no matter how much healing that it does provide me, it does come up of just, why? It's hard to cope with that because you really do start to think, especially as a kid, you think it's your fault that you did something to deserve that. It's not. I mean, a lot of the situations that kids go through, we have zero control about it, which little bothers me a little bit because especially for the older kids, if you involve them in the conversations, they could have a say in what happens to them. Because I know even when I was 16, 17, having to act like an adult, no one included me in those conversations of what was happening to me. That probably could have saved me and got me into 80-12 if people were including me in those conversations instead of kind of putting me on the back burner and thinking that I can't comprehend what's happening to me. I mean, if you really start talking to foster youth, you'll realize that's not the case for a lot of kids. They're very aware of what's going on. Even as a minor, it's like if you give them that little bit of piece of I can control what happens to me, we would internalize it less of we did something to cause this. It's been a path to kind of really get past the struggles of just constantly asking why and being stuck in that really dark cave of I did this or I deserve this.
Yeah, I think that the theory, I think we all do that where like something bad happens to you. It's like, oh, I must have done something, is that it gives you a sense of control. If I did this, so maybe I could do something different and then everything will change. And I think that's what you're saying is that if something bad happened to you, give yourself some sense of control so that you feel like you can prevent it in the future. You can't prevent what happened, that you had no control over. Going forward, needing control is necessary. So I think that's a really good touch point for what are some of the changes that you wish were happening in the foster care system? Like, how would you redesign the system? I know that's a big question. But I'm sure there's 4 or 5 things you could say, wow, if they only did this. And number one, start incorporating the actual desires and needs of the child.
Yeah, that would be one of my really biggest changes is just incorporating them in the decision process because I mean I've met and seen too many youth that are much wiser in their age than they should be because they never had a chance to just be a kid, but they're still treated as kids just because of their age. So yeah, that would be definitely one of the biggest changes that I would love to see happen. And another one would be just kids are taken away from their families far too often. They're not utilizing kinship care. Like if there is a trusted adult in their life that is willing to take them in and has to provide them support through their struggles, they're being put in foster homes instead of putting in those placements. And for the kids that come from indigenous backgrounds, that's hitting them the hardest. Right. Because I mean, I've met too many where they're losing their native languages and their sense of identity because they're just stripped from their communities. And I mean, even for me, it was hard because like I had no information of like my race or ethnicity of my parents or where I came from. And when I would sit in high school classes and they'd ask you where you're from, I'm the only kid in class who can't answer the question. And it's really defeating not being able to know. And it's like the closest time you can is after you turn 18 when you go and start seeking the files. And it's just, I wish those were more utilized of kinship care, of putting kids with families or other people, relatives, instead of putting them in placements, because another big issue that we have is there isn't enough placements. We're seeing this a lot, and they're putting them in juvenile detention centers instead of homes. There's not enough placements. There isn't enough foster homes. That's not a place we really should be putting these kids. I mean, because then they're getting labeled and then they're internalizing that label and then it reflects in their behavior at no fault of their own.
Right. Yeah.
I that's one of the really big changes I wish would start happening because it's devastating to see the consequences.
What do you think of the group home kind of environment? Is that any better? You know, I keep thinking about that need to belong, which is what you're talking about. At least have a place where you belong and it's stable.
Yeah.
But I don't know that the group homes offer that either.
It's hard because I myself haven't had really any exposure to group homes. From the information that I have gotten, it's very like cover up, shady kind of not really being able to know what's really going on in the group homes. And I've heard a lot of things about like kids running away from group homes because of mistreatment. And like I would like to think the more positively about group homes in terms of like if it's done correctly and appropriately for these kids, they would be able to grow up with a sense of community. Any space that I've been in with foster youth, even if it's the first time we've met, we get it. Like the first day we walk in a room, we get it. We are a community, and it's one of the closest knit communities. So it's, if you're doing these kids justice in these group homes, they'll be able to attach to that and grow with it for the kids that are in these placements. That alone could do a lot of repairing to the damage that's been done by past families or other placements that they have been in. Especially like one of the other issues is a lot of kids are being transferred to multiple placements, and you're teaching them to never rely on a placement. Right. Instead of them being able to grow up with the same kids in the home, at some point they're going to give up if you keep moving them.
Yeah, and then blaming them for behaviors that anybody in their right mind would say this is BS and get angry. What would you like to talk about in terms of the foster care system that you think is a misconception?
Oh, there's a lot of misconceptions. Two of the ones that I really feel passionate about is that people assume that children in foster care are just bad juvenile delinquents or just runaways, and that's far from true, especially because a lot of these situations are out of their control. I mean, if you having runaways, it's because of mistreatment and they don't know what to do. I mean, I was adopted. I ran away from home. because I mean, it was just so much mistreatment that it's like you break at a certain point and you want to escape and you want to stop the fighting. That's the closest thing you know how to do because you're a minor. There's nothing else you can do. Thinking that everyone is just a juvenile delinquent, it's because of the lack of placement. That's where we're sending these kids.
Yeah.
At no fault of their own, they're just labeled that because there is no placement. Even if they do not need to be there or have no reason they are there, that's the label they're given. And I mean, even as being adopted, my parents said I was going to get into drugs and get pregnant at 16, drop out of school and go nowhere in life. So, I mean, even in foster care, being adopted doesn't even take away that stigma. Just because we go through this trauma, that stigma seems to stick with us, which to me is just, it's ridiculous. And by the time I turned 8, I was convinced on a personal level I was going to go nowhere in life. I mean, when I first started working with John Byrne Advocates for Youth, like I thought I was going to fail. I mean, it was really, really devastating just how internalized these messages get for these kids. And one of the other really big misconceptions is that all children are abused. And the reality is most of these situations is due to neglect, but neglect is a fancy word for poverty. And especially just living in California, I mean, the cost of living in California is ridiculous.
Right.
And the child welfare system basically is saying that, like, if you don't have enough money, you can't take care of your kids. Even when they're in a very loving home, money seems to be the determinant of how safe and well taken care of these kids are. Removing these kids from their home with loving families is not helping them. Instead, it's like we should be giving these families the services so they can take care of their kids instead of continually overwhelming the system with just removing kids, because California is ridiculously expensive to live in. It's difficult.
I think there's a kind of a cycle of trauma that gets played out in this birth families having trauma. And then because the systems, the way that they're set up, the kids end up in the system, experience trauma, and it just goes on. And at what point can we break that process? That's the thing that we're all trying to figure out. Let's say that you're someone who's listening now is in foster youth and is in, or I don't even want to use it like foster youth because it's like, that's not your identity. You are who you are, right? You're in a situation where you're in a foster care situation. What kinds of resources or supports can you talk about that might be available to them so that they feel that they have a background of help that may go beyond the placement that they're in or the situation that they're in?
I know a lot of it would depend on age, because I know those are younger, could be in high school, middle school, elementary school, and then those that are over 18 are potentially in college or in trade schools, and I know there's charter schools as well. For me, I would definitely advise them to just reach out. School campuses was one of the big supports for me, even through high school and middle school. I had individuals that cared for me, even though it was only like, I knew you for 2 years. Like, I had those people, like, in middle school, my vice principal, she was one of the people that really turned things around for me. I was a DF student, and just from one intervention with her, I started getting A's and B's. And it just took one person to really actually show an interest, not just, oh, how do we fix your behavior? It's more than that. It's actually sitting down and asking them, like, what is going on? And I feel like a lot of the youth going through these situations would be surprised how many individuals there are that do care. They may not be currently in your life, but just reaching out. Like, I mean, I had teachers that would sit next to me and just ask me how things were going. And I often found comfort in just hanging out in their classrooms for lunch, just being able to do that. And I think it's also picking up a lot more traction with high schools having programs specifically for foster youth. I remember at my high school, we had a group where during our extra period, all the kids in foster care, we would just come together and hang out and goof off and eat lunch together. And it was really, really great. And even with college campuses, like, I would have very few teachers that were really interested. And when I told them like something is going on, they were like, yeah, we're going to give you an incomplete. We're going to help you finish this work at a slower pace. I guess I would just advise them to not be afraid to reach out to people and make those connections, especially through school. School is one of the biggest impacts that I had with people that cared.
So teachers, counselors, coaches,
Yes.
one thing that I've heard people say sometimes is the reason I'm afraid to reach out is I've reached out before and then that person wasn't what I thought they were, or they weren't there when I actually needed them. So how did you handle experiences like that?
Oh, it was hard. I mean, even now I have that trouble with reaching out and making friendships because I've had a lot of friendships and I would lose those, and it would become devastating. It did take a lot of effort on my side of kind of really setting up boundaries and kind of looking for what do I want in a friend or what do I want in someone that's gonna, if they say they care about me, I want their behavior to reflect that. Because I've had a lot of situations where, I mean, I lived with my parents for 13 years and it was, oh, we love you, we love you, we love you. Now we're gonna kick you out. And it's really, really devastating, but it is hard because I learned this over the years. It isn't forever. Having those experiences and people walking out of your life, it is not forever. I mean, I have an amazing partner now. I have a daughter. It isn't forever. It gets better. And it is hard to believe that for a youth who's 17 and still experiencing that, but to just kind of remind themselves, like, you're okay. Like, you have you. And if they have those important people, hold on to it.
Right.
Because I did have those important people and I lost them over the years.
And also remember that everybody has those experiences, whether you've grown up in foster or other situations. We all have experiences where people have let us down, and it's a process of learning that it's not about you. Other people have other things going on that make them not able to be there when you need them. So let's talk about this really amazing program called Hope Accounts. Can you just kind of give us like an overview of what it is and how it's going to work to help foster kids?
Absolutely. The new California Hope Accounts program is an individual trust fund account program for foster youth who have been in care for 18 months or longer, or for youth who have lost a parent or caregiver to COVID. So the goal of these accounts is to generate generational wealth. We know many of our foster children often exit the foster care system with little or no wealth. I know I did when my parents abandoned me. I didn't grow up with nothing, but once they kicked me out, my foster parents kicked me out, I had nothing. It was really my first exposure of what poverty was. And for children who lost a parent or caregiver to COVID, I mean, this came really rapidly and unexpected, and it left them with either one less parent or multiple losses within a family network, because I know families, when they're going through hardship, they would typically come together as a unit and really help each other out. And I often do say this, but these accounts are exactly what they say. It's going to give hope to these children in California and for future generations. But these accounts essentially will help fill in the gaps in which they do not have any support anymore. Say they want to go to college, buy a car, a home, start a business, or even let the money sit and build interest so they can achieve their goals. These accounts would ideally allow for these children and youth to decide what path they want to go down with fewer limitations due to circumstances out of their control. So these accounts would essentially be set up, say, if the child is 5 years old and they lost a parent or caregiver during COVID, the account would be set up. A certain amount of money, which is to be determined, would be invested in this account. It would accrue interest over the time that they turn 18. They would have the option to take it out when they turn 18. If they decide they don't want to, they can opt to leave it in, so it can accrue more interest. And they can take it out when they're ready to start a business, buy a car, things that will really help them. That losing that parent really affected their ability to kind of navigate their future of when they're entering the adult world. So right now we are actually looking for youth. I am in charge of creating a youth panel of experts. We are looking for children ages 13 to 17 who have been in the foster care system for more than 18 months, or have lost a parent or caregiver to COVID. This is a paid opportunity of $500 with a very minimal time commitment lasting until October. We're providing an opportunity for the youth to share their voice and their perspective and engage in the work of creating the California Hope Account program. So if there is any youth that is interested in this type of work, I would love for them to reach out to me. They can reach out to me at 916-400-9632. They can either call or text me. We really want to give the youth a chance to share like what it would be like to set up a bank account and just have that experience. And because we're really in the designing of what the program will look like before implementation starts. And the best people are going to tell us what's best for them is the youth themselves who would be qualified and are eligible for these programs. So the goal of this panel is to give them the opportunity to do that. So if there is any youth that is interested in this type of work, I would love for them to reach out to me. We really want to give the youth a chance to share like what it would be like to set up a bank account and just have that experience. And the goal of this panel is to give them the opportunity to do that.
So we're going to give the information at the end as well. So if you didn't catch that number and all of that, we'll provide that. So just going to reiterate, if you're between the ages of 13 and 17 and you've been in foster care for at least 18 months, and then it's $500.
Yep.
And they'll call the number. Go ahead and say the number again, just in case anyone's grabbed a pen and paper. It's ready to write it down again. Go ahead.
Of course. 916-400-9632.
And they'll call that number. And if they qualify, they can get on this panel, which is going to inform how the HOPE program is going to work, a lot of the details of how that's going to work. So when do you expect the HOPE program to launch and have the money ready for kids when they age out of the system so they can access the money?
We are anticipating it being about a year from now, maybe a little bit less. But we also know that say there's a youth who is 19 now, but was a minor when they lost their parent to COVID after March 13th, 2020, they would be eligible for these accounts still, regardless if they are past the age of 18, because they lost their parent during that time and they were a minor. They would essentially get that cash right then and there. They would have the first access, the first rollout of funds to help them out due to losing one of their parents or both parents. That's when we're kind of looking at things. But the youth panel, we're hoping to get that started as soon as possible. We're looking at our first meeting probably being the beginning of August. So I would definitely encourage them to reach out soon if they are interested.
What are the ways that you qualify if you're in foster care? Do you have to sign up somewhere, or are you going to be contacted automatically?
So that is actually one of the areas we're still in the works on. That's why having these youth voices is very, very critical. So the foster youth, they're going to actually be the easiest. We're hoping to design a program that will be auto-enroll. So we're hoping it'll be as minimal process as possible for the youth themselves. We've been in a lot of conversations to figure out the best way to do that. And then those for COVID, we've been in conversations with different organizations on data collection, on figuring out where these kids are, what is the best way to locate them. And a lot of the other work we're going to do is including outreach to make sure we reach these youth. So yeah, all of that process is in the works currently, and the youth panel will help us navigate that as well.
I'm amazed that on a policy level, this got through the California legislature. I mean, it's California, there's a lot of left-leaning folks, but this is an incredible program, and I'm pretty amazed. And what I hope, the message that I see in that from a big picture is that people care.
Yeah.
You know, the state of California cares, and the state of California represents the people of California, and they care. I hope that it's not just seen as, okay, it's money. Money is a representation of the fact that we see that foster youth need help, and what's happened to them is not fair. And we're going to try through having these accounts to show that you're important and you matter, and we want to see you succeed.
Exactly.
What kind of advice would you give to educators or professionals adoptive parents, anyone who can help understand better what are the needs of kids that have gone through the foster care system to help them. What can we be doing better or more of?
I know I mentioned this earlier, but just having them in the conversations, and even if they aren't conversations to essentially get somewhere, or just talk to them. Just ask them like what's going on. I remember when I was 17, it's like, if you would have asked me what I felt was best for my situation, I would have been able to tell you flat out what it was I needed from the systems that were supposed to take care of me, for educators and professionals to just sit down and talk with them. And really, especially the more conversations I have, the more awareness they're going to get of what's really, really going on, especially just allowing them the chance to story tell their experiences, because even doing that, it is a confidence builder.
Yeah.
Of just being able to share your story, because they're able to, I got better over the years of being able to share my story. It affects me less emotionally now. So now I'm at a point where my reason for sharing my story is to improve the lives of other kids. And being able to do that helps them. And it also gives them a power of, this is my truth. This is something that I get to say how I want to say it without being told to say it. So it gives them a sense of power and control back that, some of these kids could have lost for 10 years or more. And yeah, that's one of the biggest advices I would give to educators and professionals, is just step up their work and being able to learn.
Yeah, if educators, professionals can create a platform where kids can tell their story. And there's different reasons, like you said, to tell your story. One is to get help. 2 is, to tell them what you need. 3 is to get it out there because you need to. I think it's part of our human nature that we need to talk things out, whether it's to a therapist or a friend or someone. And when you do that, your brain kind of figures out, it's the narrative, this happened and then this happened. And I always say that you can't see your own power and resilience until you tell your story. Yeah. Then it gets revealed, it kind of blooms open, and you're like, wow, I was there and now I'm here, and now I can see my future different and all that. So yeah, storytelling is extremely important.
I was just thinking about that too, because as I started sharing my story, especially back then, it was mostly just that. It would end at, yeah, my parents did this, or I went through this. And now it's, but look at me now. Look at where I'm at now, aside from that. So it doesn't make it go away, but you have all of these things that builds on top of it.
Yeah, I think the storytelling is really, really important. We don't offer kids enough places that are safe where they can tell their story. And I think social media, unfortunately, is a mean place sometimes.
Yep.
And if you have access to therapy, of course, that's a really great place to start, because there it is very protected by nature of therapy. But you've done an incredible job of telling your story.
Thank you.
Really, this is really, really good. Is there anything that you would like to say, a kid in foster care is listening, that you would like to say to them that you feel like might help them?
Don't doubt your power. I doubted mine for a very long time. I'm 25 now. I somewhat feel old, but I'm really not. Because, I've been through so much, and I know that's how a lot of our youth feel, because, we've been through more things than most average adults have. By the time we're 18, I don't want these kids to be doubting their power. It may take some time, but you will get there. One day you will get there. And we have so many programs, so many resources. Just like you were saying earlier, this Hope Accounts, it's telling these kids that California cares about them. That's why we do all of this work and policy advocacy, because these programs will help them. All of the programs that we have through colleges, high schools, they exist for a reason for these kids. That's, I guess, would be the message that I hope reaches them.
So as we wrap it up, we always ask the same question, because so much of resilience depends on other people. and the generations and how generations work together and help each other. Can you tell us one person when you were growing up who made a difference for you?
It was definitely my therapist. I worked with her at minimum for 5 years. It might have been closer to 6, which is actually a really long time. I turned 21 and aged out, so I wasn't able to work with her anymore. She was there through my parents kicking me out, my foster parents kicking me out. She was there through it all for me. I always kind of like seemed it as a little bit of a sad thing. Like I only saw her 1 hour, maybe every 2 weeks, maybe every week. But the fact that she made so much of an impact just from that 1 hour, but it was consistent. It was every 2 weeks. I knew I was going to get to see her and she was there. That really, really changed my life. There was part of me that viewed her as sort of a mother figure. So, I mean, there was even things where I was kind of scared to share with her because I'm like, I'm going to get in trouble maybe, even though that wasn't the design of our relationship. But she made that much of an impact for me. I mean, we don't have a relationship now, but everything I do is for her. Like she's the one who gets all of this credit because I mean my degree in school right now is psychology. She was the one that sparked that work for me. She made everything better for me. And I wanted to be able to give that back to other kids. And then I fell in policy work and realized I can do it at a much larger scale. I will never forget her.
See, that's part of it. She may not even be aware of the impact that she has had on your life. And you don't know. We don't know how you're affecting people. And Cody, you don't know how you telling your story is affecting so many people. So that's the nature of how we get stronger together.
Exactly.
Thanks for listening. This is the Bounce Back Generation podcast. Thank you to our guest, Cody Van Felden. Our producer is Liam Donaldson. Music by Jogging Turtle. I'm Jennifer Dillon. If you would like to learn more about us, visit our website at bouncebackgeneration.org or our media site at bbgtv.org or follow us on Instagram at bouncebackgeneration.